What's a crazy experience you can't explain? When I was about 15, I had a vivid dream. All I saw was darkness, but I could hear my mom's voice saying, "It's almost done. You're doing great." And it's gone. I didn't think much of it at the time. About 3 months later, my earrings became embedded in my ears, and I had to go to the hospital to have them removed. While there, they sprayed freezing spray on my ear, which touched my eardrum and knocked me unconscious. However, I could still hear things. All I saw was darkness, and my mom said the exact same phrases I had heard in my dream months before. No one believes me, but it was an incredibly strange experience. Story 2. I used to live and work at Ayers Rock. One day, as I was crossing some sand dunes with groceries, I began to feel deeply depressed. Suddenly, I sensed something massive approaching. I looked up but didn't see or hear anything unusual. Nevertheless, I felt my whole body begin to vibrate. It was like being in a powerful storm. At first, I thought I would be annihilated, but I realized this entity was going to pass by me. I had a strong feeling it had noticed me, and a wave of overwhelming love and compassion washed over me. A word boomed in my head. Breathe. Story 3. When I was little, maybe 5 years old, I would sometimes walk into my parents' bedroom to sleep with them. Many times when entering their room, I would see a young girl in a white dress standing at the foot of their bed. I would be paralyzed with fear. But being young, I don't think I fully understood what I was seeing. I would take slow, agonizing steps forward until I could crawl into bed and completely cover myself with their blankets. The girl never moved, spoke, or acknowledged my presence. She was just there. Story 4. I was driving during a snowstorm when a police car started driving next to me with its lights on, but no sirens. I looked at the officers, but they didn't look at me. They had an odd expression on their faces. Something felt off. They accelerated slightly to pass me and then completely disappeared. I drove for about 15 minutes on the road without seeing them anywhere. They couldn't have gone very far as the road conditions were terrible. The experience left me feeling unsettled for a long time. Story 5. Once I was helping my mom unload groceries from the car. She was certain she had bought milk, but neither of us could find it, so she assumed she had forgotten to purchase it. Later that day, my mom found the carton of milk in our microwave. It was the strangest thing, and we couldn't explain how it got there. Story 6. I was sitting in my car with just my dad when I distinctly heard my sister, who was at home, say, "Are you guys almost home?" I'm scared, in a very specific, concerned tone of voice. 2 seconds later, my dad's phone rang. It was my sister on the line, and she said, "Are you guys almost home?" I'm scared, in the same concerned tone of voice. I was quite freaked out by the experience. Story 7. Every morning on my way to work, I'd walk through a shopping mall. On a bench in the mall, there would sit an elderly man who appeared to be waiting for someone. The man was fairly nondescript, but always had some small detail that made him look like he was trying to be fashionable, but not quite succeeding. A golfer's cap, a vest, or logger boots, for example. Every morning when I walked by, I noticed him and always wondered who he was waiting for. For 4 years, I never saw him actually meeting anyone. Then I got a new job and started working in another part of town. 3 days into my new job, as I walked from the subway towards work, I saw the same man sitting on a bench, waiting for someone. It was a bizarre coincidence that left me questioning reality. Story 8. When I was a kid, I was playing with a puppet in my brother's old bedroom. There was literally nothing in the room since we were renovating, just bare floors. I pretended to feed the puppet a Fruit Loop cereal piece, opened its mouth, and to my amazement, the Fruit Loop was gone. I searched everywhere, but it seemed like the puppet had actually eaten it. This still puzzles me to this day. Story 9. I was about 12 years old when I had a strange experience. I was walking my dog and was almost to my driveway when I looked down for some reason. When I looked back up, I found myself back at the road about 6 blocks away from where I thought I was. I was so confused, but my dog looked completely fine. It's worth noting that I don't drink or use any substances, and I was quite young at the time. This unexplainable occurrence has stayed with me ever since. Story 10. One summer afternoon when I was younger, my family heard the music of an ice cream truck coming down our road. Ice cream trucks never came to our neighborhood, so we were excited. We ran outside and placed our orders, expressing our surprise to the woman inside the truck. "Really," she said, "I come down this road every week." We all responded, sure you do." She drove off, and we never saw her again. I'm sure it was just a mistake on her part, but I like to think there's an alternate reality where we get ice cream trucks on our street every week. Story 11. I share my name with my great-grandfather on my father's side. I never met him, as he died 20 years before I was born. He was reportedly 6 feet tall, eccentric, obsessed with intellectual pursuits, but so prone to getting lost in thought that he would forget to do important things. The rest of my family is fairly short, very straight-laced, conservative, and blue-collar. Then there's me, apparently the second coming of my great-grandfather. Height, tendencies, personality, general appearance and all. A week before I got married, my brother was going through old records and discovered that my great-grandfather's wife had the same name as my wife. This was particularly strange, as no living family member had ever met her, as she died young in the 1930s. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just reused content in the grand scheme of things. Story 12. I was playing fetch with my owner. I was enjoying running to catch the ball as he threw it, and then I ran back and gave it to him, and he threw it again. We kept doing this for a while. Then he threw the ball, and when I went to look for it, it had completely disappeared. Vanished. I vividly remember him throwing the ball, but I looked everywhere, and it was gone. I couldn't even smell it. But here's the weirdest thing. When I looked back, the ball had rematerialized in my owner's hand from behind his back. This happened last summer, and I still think about it to this day. Story 13. I was sitting in my office one day when my desk phone rang. It was my undersheriff asking me to bring him all the reports, dispatch logs, and any documentation related to a specific case. I gathered everything together and started towards his office. I met him in the hallway and handed him the paperwork. He asked what it was, and I told him, "It's the documentation you asked for." He then swore he had never asked me for it, that he had just arrived and had not called my office. He said he was on his way down the hall to ask me to get it together. We were both quite confused by this strange turn of events. Story 14. Once, I ate at a popular casual dining restaurant chain, and both the food and the service were good at the same time. This was such an unusual occurrence that it still stands out in my memory as a strange glitch in the normal order of things. Story 15. I have a jade Buddhist necklace I bought in China about 10 years ago. It disappears for months at a time, only to reappear somewhere obvious like my desk, my dresser, or in a drawer I use every day. I've come to accept this strange occurrence and just say it goes on a trip and will come back eventually. Story 16. When I was in college, I took a journalism class where one of the assignments was to write an obituary for one of my grandparents. The professor told us to write it about a deceased grandparent, but if all of our grandparents were still alive, we had to choose one. In my case, all of my grandparents were alive. I procrastinated on the assignment until the night before it was due because it seemed like a morbid task. I called my mom to ask for some basic biographical information about my maternal grandfather. As we were talking, my mom couldn't recall the name of one of the companies he worked for. She lectured me about waiting until the last minute, but said she would give him a call to see if he was still awake. When my mom called my grandpa, my grandma answered the phone in a panic. She frantically explained that the paramedics had just arrived and were performing CPR on my grandpa because he had stopped breathing and lost consciousness. My mom stayed on the phone with my grandma until they took my grandpa to the hospital, where he was declared deceased. In the time my mom and I had been talking on the phone about my grandpa's obituary, he was actually passing away. His death was entirely unexpected. Although he was in his 80s, he was the healthiest of my grandparents at the time. We ended up using the obituary I wrote for that assignment as his actual obituary. It still gives me chills when I think about the timing. Story 17. I was walking my dog through the woods one evening, wearing headphones. It was rare to see anyone else walking at this time on a Friday, which is why I had chosen to walk her then. As I was coming down through a field, I suddenly started to feel on edge. The feeling kept getting worse, so I turned off my music and took out my headphones. I was half jogging by the time I got to the bottom of the field. My dog had run ahead of me. I squeezed through a hole in the fence onto a dirt path surrounded by trees, took the usual right turn, and kept checking behind me. That's when I saw something terrifying. A shadow-like figure flicked from behind one tree to behind another, larger oak tree. I think I audibly yelped but I kept power walking away. I was still fairly close to whatever this was, and I knew I was unlikely to be able to outrun it. I walked a few more paces before turning around again. This thing was now standing right in the center of the path, further back near that tree. It had its arms straight down, but out from its sides, its hands were fists, and it was standing with a wide-legged stance. It looked like the shadow of a person. It appeared to have a cloak and a wide-brimmed hat, but the whole figure was completely dark. It just looked angry, and it was staring right down the path at me. Needless to say, I sprinted home from there and was in a state of panic when I made it back. Story 18. My grandfather was enlisted in World War II at the very end of the war when he was 17. During his training, he was at a firing range. He was standing off to the side, waiting for his turn, when a lieutenant he had never seen before came up to him and said very sternly, "You're not supposed to stand there. Move." A little confused, he moved to a different area. Just a minute or two after he did, a bullet ricocheted right where he would have been standing. He never saw that lieutenant again. He figured he may have been saved by a guardian angel. Story 19. I was driving about 50 miles per hour, and a car ran a stop sign on an on-ramp and pulled out right in front of me. I remember bracing for impact, and then suddenly I was about 300 yards down the highway. I saw the car at the ramp in my rearview mirror, just about to pull out. It was as if time had skipped forward, but only for me. Story 20. I was bike riding one day, and I repeatedly passed the same couple on a walking trail. If you don't know this particular trail very well, you may not realize that you can go off the main path and ride around on these mini trails. I did this because I was using a fitness tracking app, and I wanted to get more mileage in. So I passed this walking couple on the main trail, and then I went on one of those loops. When I got back on the main trail, the couple had passed me, so I ended up passing them again. I did this 2 or 3 more times, and I even overheard the man say, "How did she get behind us again?" Basically, they thought that I just kept passing them every 5 minutes or so. The main trail takes at least 20 to 30 minutes to get around. It was pretty funny, and I like to think they thought it was a glitch in the Matrix. Story 21. My grandmother passed away when I was 14. Shortly after, I was home alone walking through the family room. My grandmother always wore a specific perfume, and I've always been super sensitive to smell, so when I caught a whiff of it as I was walking, I immediately associated it with her. I think she was checking in on me. I was the only one in the house, and we didn't have anything that smelled like that in our home. Also, I had a coworker pass away a couple years ago. The coworker was a part of a family who all worked at the restaurant together. A few times in the months after her passing, one of the fryer baskets would just drop randomly without anyone even being near it. My manager and I figured that it was my coworker letting us know she was still around. Story 22. I was looking through a dating app when I found my doppelganger. Well, a race-changed doppelganger. I sent the picture to my closest friend, and he said, "Ha! It's you as a different ethnicity." I sent the guy a message saying, "Haha, I have the same face." He replied, "Thanks." It was a surreal experience to see someone who looked so similar to me, but of a different background. Story 23. My wife passed away a year ago today. Some odd things happened, like a couple of old, meaningful pictures showing up that I was sure were in storage. The strangest occurrence was when I vacuumed the carpet, and as soon as I was done, a diamond ring was on the ground right where I had just cleaned. It was as if she was saying, "Hey, this one is real, don't lose it." These unexplainable events brought a mix of comfort and bewilderment during a difficult time. Story 24. I was at a stoplight about to turn left under a highway bridge. In front of me, and to the left, was the turnaround lane for traffic coming from the other direction. I heard a police siren and saw a motorcycle cop with lights flashing, following a white SUV. The white SUV turned left in the turnaround lane, with the police officer following about 20 feet behind. This is where it gets strange. Both the SUV and motorcycle cop were going roughly 25 miles per hour. As the cop entered the turnaround lane, his siren suddenly shut off the moment he passed behind a small concrete pillar. He never came out from the other side of the pillar. The SUV just continued on as if nothing had happened. I sat there in disbelief, wondering how the cop could have come to a complete stop from going 25 miles per hour and why his siren turned off at the same time. The pillar would have only barely been able to cover him. When the light turned green, I went and looked behind the pillar, expecting to see him somehow, but he wasn't there. It was as if my motorcycle cop had vanished into thin air. Story 25. I have a distinct memory of being in 3rd grade and checking out a children's book from the school library. The library had a 1-week rental policy, which lined up with my class's schedule of visiting the library once a week. A week passed, and I grabbed the book from the side table to the left of my bed and brought it to school. I returned the book and got a new one. The next week, I was informed I couldn't check out a new book because my previous book was overdue. That night, the book was once again on my side table. I put it in my backpack and returned it again the next day. Then it happened again. I returned the book 3 times, each time finding it in the same spot in my room. I still can't explain how this happened. Story 26. Every night I go to bed about 2 hours before my husband. I always wake up when he comes into the room. One night he was gaming with a friend, and it was hours later I heard him sneak into the room and crawl across the floor so he could pop up and scare me. I felt the floor kind of shake and felt him bump clumsily against the side of the bed in the dark. I held out my hand and asked him not to scare me. I was already scared enough and begged him to just take my hand and come to bed. I couldn't see anything in the room, but knew he was there and just waited for him to jump up so I could move on and go back to sleep. That's when I heard him talking to his friend in the other room. I was frozen. I know there's sleep paralysis or lucid dreaming or something that explains this, but I would have sworn on my life that someone had crawled across the floor and jostled the bed. Story 27. Not my story, but my grandmother's. When my mother was in high school, Grandma had recurring dreams in which Mom was marrying a brown-haired professor who wore a fisherman's cap and smoked a pipe. My dad, who my mom met maybe 5 years or so after Grandma had those dreams, is a brown-haired professor who wears a fisherman's cap and smoked a pipe until Mom made him quit. Okay, he didn't officially become a professor until after they married, but still, it's as if my grandmother had somehow foreseen my mother's future husband in her dreams. Story 28. My bedroom at the time led into the living room that you could see into the kitchen. We also had a bathroom that was directly off our room, in the corner. You couldn't get to it unless you were in our room. I woke up one afternoon. I remember sitting up, checking my phone and lighting a cigarette. I got out of bed, opened the bedroom door, walked into the living room to turn the thermostat up. I saw my ex in the kitchen fiddling around with the coffee pot. Story 28. My bedroom at the time led into the living room that you could see into the kitchen. We also had a bathroom that was directly off our room, in the corner. You couldn't get to it unless you were in our room. I woke up one afternoon. I remember sitting up, checking my phone and lighting a cigarette. I got out of bed, opened the bedroom door, walked into the living room to turn the thermostat up. I saw my ex in the kitchen fiddling around with the coffee pot. Story 29. After my little brother passed away, the next morning I was talking with a friend, and he mentioned this other guy I went to high school with, whose younger brother had died in a car accident a couple weeks before. Later that day, I pull out a slip of paper with this other dude's number and name on it from my pants. I vaguely remember running into him a year or so before this at a club where he gave me his number. I swear I had worn and washed these jeans at least a dozen times since I had run into this dude. I still makes no sense how that paper was there, and I only found it then. I called the dude and we talked a bunch. It really helped me deal with the situation. Story 30. I'm currently 4 months pregnant, and towards the beginning of my pregnancy, had a dream of a young woman with long dark hair and a face that looked similar to mine and my niece's, with glasses and a big smile. In my dream, she was my daughter. I thought the dream was a little kooky until I found out we're having a girl. If she comes out with dark hair and glasses, I will be spooked. Story 31. It isn't creepy, but when I was in high school, I had a dream. I was in an all-white classroom, totally white, like the ones you would see in a dream, and a girl was sitting in the chair on my side. During the dream, I knew it was a dream because that girl was a senior. We didn't have common classes. About 6 years later, I was at a master class. The sun was shining bright outside. The classroom was very illuminated, and I see this girl on my side. We are doing masters together and having a class in an all-white classroom. Of course, I remembered the dream at that very moment. The coincidence was uncanny. Story 32. A year ago, I saw myself, 7 years younger, driving past me as I was walking on the sidewalk. It was like seeing a younger version of me from the past, and it left me questioning reality for a moment. Story 33. During my freshman year of high school, I was just talking with my friends like usual, and then one of them pointed to a guy walking across the other side of the courtyard and said, "Hey, look, it's a guy who looks just like you." Oddly, the guy walking past had the exact same outfit and haircut as me. I didn't see his face, nor did I ever see him again. It was weird as can be. Story 34. I occasionally have dreams where a few months or weeks down the line, I experience that moment, but I always forget what the dream was about right up until it happens. My first experience was in 6th grade when I had a dream where I was having a conversation with my teacher. At the time, I was sat in the back of the class, and that was about when I had the dream. Fast forward 2.5 weeks, and I've been moved to the front of the class, and it happens. There she is, talking to me about some work I need to do because I was absent for a few days. And then I have this déjà vu moment, and as she's speaking, I'm staring blankly at her, remembering this conversation. I told her, and her reaction was the exact same as in my dream, facial expressions and all. Story 35. I don't personally remember this, but I would see my deceased grandfather all the time when I was a kid. From the ages of 7 to 9, there were probably 10 different incidents. My dad was an absolute scaredy cat when it came to ghosts and wanted to take me to the doctor. My dad had one of those bathrooms with a separate toilet room, and no one that lived in the house closed the bathroom door unless they were bathing. I was playing a video game, and my dad asked why the bathroom door was closed, and I said it's because Grandpa's in there. That's the only one I actually remember. There were maybe 2 other bathroom incidents, and some incidents when I would sit on the floor and watch TV with my dad, and he would tell me to go sit in what was once my grandfather's chair, and I said I couldn't because Grandpa was sleeping. I don't know how creepy these are, to be honest, but they freaked out my family for sure. He made it past the work van coming at him from the right, and I was terrified for him because a car was coming fast from the left. However, when the work van passed and stopped blocking my sight, so I couldn't see what became of him, he was gone. What? Heck, I still wonder where he went 6 years later. Story 37. I was on vacation in Florida, visiting a friend. We were walking on the beach on a perfectly sunny day when everything went black for a second. I thought it was weird, but explained it away, thinking that my eyes were playing tricks on me, until he looked at me and said, "Did everything go black for a second?" We both experienced the same momentary blackout, which left us questioning what had just happened. Story 38. I spilled chocolate ice cream on my leg. I wiped it off, and there was still a pale brown stain in the shape of the ice cream splotch. I told my mother, who said it was a birthmark. I will swear under oath that never before that moment did I have a birthmark there. It's as if the ice cream incident somehow created a permanent mark on my skin. Story 39. Every once in a while, I have dreams about places or people I've never seen. Then about 6-7 months later, I'm in the place or with the people and have déjà vu. I also sing random songs, even when something else is playing on the radio. Then the next song that plays is what I was singing. I've done this on mine, my best friends, and my girlfriend's music players on shuffle many times, and it freaks them out every time. One super weird thing happened when I was about 19. I came home from work from my job at a barbecue place, and my sister says to me, "Oh, I thought you said you were off today." I'm confused because I left at 5 a.m. before anyone was awake, and I ask her, "When did I say that?" She says to me, "Like 2 hours ago in your room." She thinks I'm messing with her, so I tell her to smell me because you can smell the barbecue sauce and smoke on me. Then she gets really creeped out and tells me she had gone into my room earlier and seen me in bed with covers up to my neck and had a 15-minute conversation with me. That really creeped me out, and I never felt comfortable in that room ever again. Story 40. Sometime in 1972, my dad was driving home from work. This was when he was young and still living with my grandma. He apparently had a feeling like static on his skin and felt extremely unsettled. It soon passed and he arrived at my grandma's house. She was sitting there in tears and began yelling at him like crazy. He had apparently been missing for 4 days. She even had to call the cops and let them know he had been found. A month later, 2 women who were last seen on that road went missing and were never seen again. It's as if my dad experienced some kind of time slip or unexplainable disappearance. Story 41. I was listening to my friend talk and he suddenly just lagged out, I guess. He sounded like a static phone and then repeated a couple of words. It was as if reality glitched for a moment, like a video game character lagging. Story 42. I was reading Kurt Vonnegut's last book, Timequake, and had put it in my backpack to read while on the bus. I left the house, and for some reason about a block later, I thought to myself, did I put the book in my bag? I looked, and it wasn't there. I went back to the house and couldn't find it, retraced my steps to where I turned around, and it was nowhere to be found. I never found the book again, and gave up on trying to get another copy. It's as if the book simply vanished into thin air. Story 43. My mother has a scar behind her knee from a cut. When I was a preteen, the exact same scar appeared on me in the exact same place. I swear it was never there before, and I would have remembered being cut that deeply for sure. It's as if the scar was somehow transferred from my mother to me. Story 44. 1 week after my great-nan passed away, I was 3 at the time, and told my mum that I had seen her in my bed, and she had told me to tell my nan, her daughter, that she was okay now. I don't think I could even comprehend death at that age, so it was a spooky experience that's hard to explain. Story 45. We lived in the same house with my grandparents. I was almost 3 years old when I walked into the kitchen where Grandma and my parents were just talking, and I said, "Did you see Grandpa? He has just flown away." A few minutes later, the phone rings, and you can guess the rest. It turns out my grandfather had just passed away. I don't really remember it, of course, but Grandma says that anytime she thinks about that, it's a relief, because it reminds her that there is something on the other side. I am not into spiritualism or anything, but I am glad if it helps her, and I think the story is kind of creepy. Story 46. When I was 19 or so, I had moved into my first apartment alone. I got all my furniture from the thrift store next door. They were pretty good finds, too. My favorite was a pair of red armchairs that I'd often fall asleep in while reading. One night I woke up, and there was a little girl sitting in the chair across from me. My lights were still on, as I had fallen asleep reading, and I could move around, so I don't think it was sleep paralysis. She started playing peekaboo, and so I played back. When I removed my hands after the 3rd time, she was gone. I did have sleep paralysis at least 3 times a week in that apartment, but it was nothing like that night, playing peekaboo with the mysterious little girl. Story 47. I don't know if this can be classified as a glitch, and I have a feeling this might be common for a few other people, but here goes. Since I was young, off and on, I've experienced what is apparently called depersonalization. The very first time I was young, probably 6 or 7 years old, I remember clearly it was a very sunny day, and I was walking somewhere holding my mother's hand. It was the first time I'd been allowed to wear sandals instead of shoes. We were waiting to cross a road, and it happened. This sense of complete alienation from myself. I was not me. This body wasn't mine. I was just occupying it, and I was something more. It was a very strange experience. It's happened probably 2 or 3 times since then, just a feeling that I am unfamiliar with my own self, a stranger. It's also happened once with my brother, who I'm very close to. That day I looked at him and had a feeling of, who is this? Just a strange person who I call my brother. It lasts just a few seconds and is quite eerie. Story 48. In my hometown in northern Florida, we would sometimes get a thick fog that was terrible to navigate. I was always told by my grandparents that if I ever saw Confederate soldiers walking in that fog, keep my head down and move along even if they talked to me. As for Union soldiers, I was to nod and point them in a direction if they said they were lost. And if I ever ran into a woman in a white dress named Caroline, don't tell her your name and excuse yourself before she touches you. It was strange advice that made me wonder about the history and legends of our town. Story 49. I've got a sleep paralysis story for you. Usually I'll get it during the day, during a nap, if I'm on my back. And usually it's one of 4 things. 1. An invisible entity trying to choke me and drag me around the room, up to the ceiling especially. 2. An invisible entity trying to assault me. 3. Just a general falling, flying sensation. And sometimes it'll even seem like I'm going through walls or the floor, like I pulled an Ant-Man and went subatomic or something. The 4th kind is where it seems like there are people around, whether strangers or friends or my significant other. One day, I'm in the bedroom napping, and sleep paralysis happens. This time, it sounds like there's a bunch of people walking back and forth outside the bedroom windows, but I can't make out any of what's being said. I'm trying to move, trying to hear the voices better, trying to just snap out of it, but not having any luck. And then one male voice comes in clear as a bell and just says, "Poop." That broke the spell, and I woke up laughing at the singular word. Story 50. Before my grandpa passed away, he had always been telling us how after he died, he would appear to us in his white clothes and watch over us. He passed away from cancer when I was 8. The years passed and I was a very unhappy kid, undiagnosed autism, trauma victim. So at age 14, I tried to harm myself. It failed, thankfully. As I was drifting away, my grandpa's image appeared to me and told me this wasn't my time to go yet and begged me to wake up. I did wake, lying on my bedroom floor, and I ran downstairs to my mom, crying, telling her what I had done. She went upstairs shortly after to clean up and told me much later that it looked as if the ropes had been cut clean with a knife. After that traumatic event, I began seeing things, puffs of mist outside in front of my bedroom window. When I was 16 was the first time I actually did see that it was my grandpa, just floating in front of my window. I tried to talk to him a few times. I asked him why he couldn't come inside. He responded that he couldn't, because my mom had asked him not to. We spoke about a few things on occasion when he mentioned the day where I tried to take my own life. He told me he tried to save me by cutting the rope and then went to check on me a few times. I decided to tell my mom about all this and took her out for dinner. Told her everything. She was shocked and amazed and confirmed that she did tell her father to not come inside, and that was why he stayed outside. I'm just glad she believed me. Story 51. I was a kid and my mom and I were outside taking pictures of old cars to sell in the backwoods area of our yard. All of a sudden, my mom hears rustling in the bush and she tells me to run. I had flip-flops on, so I kicked them off and booked it. Behind me, I didn't hear my mom, but I heard like a rusty clanking sound, like something jumped on the cars. While running, I didn't see my mom. I got into the house panicked, and there my mom was, sitting at the table reading the paper. What the heck? It was as if she had teleported somehow. Story 52. I used to have a pet turtle when I was younger. One morning I woke up and was walking to my kitchen when there was my turtle crawling on the floor. I picked him up and looked in his aquarium, and my turtle was still there. My parents didn't buy me another turtle, and we have no idea where it came from. It was like my turtle had somehow duplicated itself overnight. Story 53. One night I was going to sleep, and all of a sudden I start sweating profusely. I try to get up and turn on the AC, and I could not move from my bed. I was confused and a bit scared. I tried to shout to my sister in the next room over, but I couldn't talk either. At this point is when I saw a dark figure in the corner watching me. It felt like years until the silence broke. It muttered in a distorted voice, "You are not safe." At this point, I could hear my heart pounding like it was in my ear. Next thing I knew, the figure moved across the room and to the foot of my bed. It stared into my soul, and then I could move. I was soaked in sweat, and that night I did not sleep. To this day, I have never had sleep paralysis after that, and I still wonder if I'm really safe. Story 54. I got a call from a police officer telling me if I didn't pay some old fines within a week, he would come arrest me. The total was 263. It was about 2 weeks before Christmas, so I was really sweating it. The very next day, I got a check in the mail for $267.63 for overpaid child support throughout the year. It was the craziest, most unexplainable coincidence I've ever experienced. Story 55. I was walking down the stairs once, having just left my office. I suddenly felt like I had been walking down these stairs for eternity, stuck in a stair loop of sorts. It seemed as if the entire world must have gone ahead in time, and I was just stuck there. I couldn't understand it at all. And even though no actual time had passed, it felt like I'd been in a repeat cycle forever. Story 56. When I was living with my parents, my dad was cleaning out one of his drawers, and found a piece of paper with a postcode for a nearby city on it. When he showed me, I immediately recognized it as my own handwriting, except I have no memory of ever writing out this postcode. So I entered the postcode into a map to find it's a random street I have never visited before and have no reason to visit. I wish I had gone there. Maybe the universe was trying to show me something. Story 57. My friend Sarah was in a nightclub when she got an overwhelming urge to tell a total stranger that her leg hurt, even though it didn't. She ignored it at first, but the feeling persisted. So she walked up to this guy and said, "I know this is crazy, but I've got a huge urge to tell you my leg hurts." I know that's strange, sorry, but he burst into tears. It turns out his dad had just passed away, and they had made a pact that if there was an afterlife, he would get a message to his son saying a totally random phrase, which they decided would be, "I've hurt my leg." The coincidence was truly mind-boggling. Story 58. When the song The Final Countdown was released in the 1980s, I already knew it. It was brand new, just released, but I knew the tune and the words and could sing the whole thing from beginning to end. I believed for a while that it was a cover version, but it wasn't. It was as if I had heard the song in a dream or another life before it was even released. Story 59. I was kind of interested in a girl a few years back. I didn't know her too well, but I'm sure she noticed it. I didn't want to rush things, so I didn't insist too much, saw her a few times at friends' parties and the like. Then suddenly within 1 week, I crossed her path twice, randomly in the city. The first time it was awkward, the second time she was clearly afraid and apparently thought I was following her. Total coincidence, but it was so bizarre that it made me question reality for a moment. Story 60. I always have weird visions, or I'll see something in a dream, but I won't notice that I've seen it. Then like a week or so after, I'll see the exact same thing, almost like déjà vu, but not quite, since it hasn't actually happened before. It would always be something so specific, and it has happened multiple times, so it can't just be a strange coincidence. It's very reassuring to see all the stories of people experiencing the same thing. Assures me that I'm not going crazy, or maybe many others are just going crazy with me. Story 61. I saw a person with no face driving a car. No features at all, it was just blank. I did more than just glance at them, I was staring. Just smooth skin and a men's haircut. I've never told anyone because it sounds so ridiculous, and I don't think people would believe me. There's probably a rational explanation for it, but it was incredibly unsettling. Story 62. I arrived 10 minutes early to school one day, so I put on my headphones and started to listen to a 10-minute track I loved. When it was over, I started walking to the entrance, but nobody was there. It was always full of people waiting for it to open. So I thought I had miscalculated the time and was late, but when I checked my watch, only 2 minutes had passed since I arrived. I sat there for the remaining 8 minutes thinking about what could have happened. Story 63. I stopped at the gas station on my way to work one morning. I took out my debit card and car keys with me and left everything else in the car. I paid for my stuff and threw my debit card in the metal cup I have in my car. Literally half a second later, I looked down and my card was gone. I pulled apart everything, trying to look for it, and couldn't find it. I went to work and went home to find it sitting on my desk. I double-checked my bank account to make sure it was the card I used, and it was. To this day, I still have no idea what happened. Story 64. 2 things happened, each witnessed by at least one other person, and both while driving. Once at a stop sign in a neighborhood, all of these little sparkles started swirling around in midair, roughly 3 to 4 feet off the ground, out of nowhere. The group of them was roughly 2 feet wide by 3 to 4 feet tall. It lasted 3 to 5 seconds, and then they were gone. No one was around, and when I asked my passenger if he saw it too, he breathed a sigh of relief and said yes. The second happened when myself and 3 friends were driving down an empty country road. A very straight stretch. A man on a bike appeared. Someone said to watch out for him so as not to hit him, and then he disappeared. Our minds were blown, to say the least. Just poof, and he was gone. Story 65. Every night I go to bed about 2 hours before my husband. I always wake up when he comes into the room. One night he was gaming with a friend, and it was hours later I heard him sneak into the room and crawl across the floor so he could pop up and scare me. I felt the floor kind of shake, and felt him bump clumsily against the side of the bed in the dark. I held out my hand and asked him not to scare me. I was already scared enough and begged him to just take my hand and come to bed. I couldn't see anything in the room, but knew he was there and just waited for him to jump up so I could move on and go back to sleep. That's when I heard him talking to his friend in the other room. I was frozen. I know there's sleep paralysis or lucid dreaming or something that explains this, but I would have sworn on my life that someone had crawled across the floor and jostled the bed. Story 66. I was sitting outside work, having a cigarette. I was looking at the bike rack and thinking about how silly it was that they had just placed one there without bolting it down. Suddenly, a bird footprint appeared in the snow. Just one footprint. It was as if a ghost bird had put just one foot down in the middle of the otherwise undisturbed snow. It happened right in front of me. I was looking exactly where it appeared when it happened. It was very strange, and I couldn't explain it. Story 67. When I was 10, I was homeless-ish and lived in an 8-foot camper. My bedroom was the top bunk thing. I'm laying there, and my jeans were annoying me as they were next to my head, so I flung them towards my feet. They flew back at me immediately and went back where they were originally. This happened 2 times in a row. I have no idea why they would move on their own. This still creeps me out.